most of the characters that I mentioned before could be called round characters. So we're going to go over different kinds of characters that you create. For when you write good fiction, you need good characters. Remember, character plus conflict equals plot. A good story has a character with a flaw that needs correction. It is this flaw correction that creates conflict, which drives the plot. Apply this formula when building stories in your journal. And so another objective of your reader response journal is for you to write short stories in your reader response journal. This is done outside of class, by the way. This is not something you're going to do for a grade in your intro to literature class. Instead, I suggest that you keep an idea journal, just a notebook where you collect ideas for your short stories. You can also write down your reactions to anything that you read. If you ever see an odd headline like baby found with puppy in its mouth, in other words, a baby is missing, and the mother and father are scrambling looking for the baby, and then a few days later, the baby is found safe and sound, sleeping and nursing next to a dog. Now it's been 25 degrees outside, snowing, and the baby just wanders off into the snow. After a whole week, you think if that baby was by himself, you think he'd be, still alive? No, it's because the dog sensed that there was a baby, crying, and thought it was a puppy, one of its puppies, so she dragged it from the snow next to her, and throughout the week, all the baby's been doing is safely, taking its milk from the dog and not knowing any better. It's the parents that got all freaked out. So the character in this case, well, in this case it's just a baby, but I'm just saying you can create stories from what you read in the newspapers. And then you could put it inside your reader response journal and keep a journal of ideas so that later on, if you want to write a short story, you would have something to work from. Now, in order to have a good story, you have to have good round characters. What is a round character? So most of the characters in a good story are known as round characters. So round characters are fully fleshed out, developed characters that have 3 dimensions, like a ball. These characters are complex, possessing conflicting traits. For example, in The Necklace, which is actually on your short story reading list for week 3 by Guy de Maupassant. So in that story, Madame Loisel is both frivolous and responsible. In other words, all she cared about was to go to a party and look pretty. And then she wants to go borrow a necklace so that she can look pretty for a party, even though she's too poor to go to fancy parties. So that's what makes her frivolous. And then she pays the price for her vanity in this story. And so that is a round character. Flat characters is the opposite. A flat character is a character that doesn't change. It's all one-dimensional. And so flat characters are predictable. They are characters that create no genuine conflicts. Flat characters often boil down to stereotypes. Fat, donut-eating cop, forgetful professor, lecherous truck driver, jovial fatso, shifty-eyed thief, anorexic model. Using these prefabricated characters can give your prose a semblance of humor and quickness, but your story featuring them as the main character will have as much chance of winning a contest as a prefab apartment in a competition of architects. Even more damaging, you will sound like a bigot. So as a writer, you ought to aspire toward understanding the varieties of human experiences, and bigotry simply means shutting out and insulting a segment of population and their experiences by reducing them to flat types. But can you have a character without types? What would literature be without gamblers or misers? The answer, I believe, is simple. Draw portraits of misers, but not as misers, but as people who happen to be miserly. And if while you draw misers as people, you feel that you fail to make characters, but do make, in other words, when you make a character, don't make them as caricatures, don't make them as stereotypes. Instead, base those characters on people you know, on people, in other words, your uncle, let's say, for example, you have an uncle who is so cheap and so miserly that he's not even going to buy a 1-cent piece of candy for himself because he's afraid that he's going to spend 1 cent, too much money. And so basically, when you create a character, base it on people that you know, so that that character can then be more real, and therefore you're not writing stereotypes. But another use of flat characters, besides what they say here, is the flat characters can be used in contrast to the round character. So while the round character changes and evolves throughout the story, the flat character remains the same. For instance, if in the Star Wars, Yoda remains the same. He's wise, he's old, and meanwhile it's the young character that evolves. So flat characters, in other words, the one-dimensional ones, can also serve as like a prop or backdrop for the round character that evolves. Okay, so that you're going to see in some of the stories like the Yellow Wallpaper, where it's the wife that goes insane while the husband remains the same. So that you see the conflict, you see the contrast between the two characters. So when you write a good story, you need to have round characters and flat characters, as well as a character with a flaw that needs correction that drives the plot. So remember the formula as character plus conflict equals plot. So you can try writing a story, short story, based on this formula in your writing reader response writing journal. And in this class, we're going to do a lot of character sketches where we look at a story and we are going to analyze the round character versus the flat character and how that serves and drives the plot. So, in both analyzing stories and in writing stories, you need round and flat characters to create the conflict in a good story. So if you have any questions about how to create characters and how important characters are to a story, you can always email me.